My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 73 years old, and on a gray Tuesday morning in Ohio, I watched my son Daniel step out of a moving truck with his wife Madison. They were not there to visit me. They were there to strip my house of the few treasures I had left. I will never forget Madison's words as she walked past me with a smile that was more of a smirk. "This is for our new house. You don't need this anymore." Behind her, Daniel carried my television, the one we had watched Saturday night movies on for decades. Two workers he had hired disconnected my refrigerator, the same one his father had saved for years to buy. Even the framed paintings that had hung on my living room walls for over 30 years were wrapped in blankets and carried out like merchandise. I stood at the doorway, my hands trembling, unable to speak. Every item that left my house was a piece of my history. The television was not just a screen. It was where Daniel and I shared laughter over cartoons when he was little. The refrigerator was not just an appliance. It was where I kept the meals I had prepared after long days at the sewing machine. And the paintings were not just decorations. They were the memory of my late husband, the man I had lost when Daniel was just 15. Daniel avoided looking at me as if my eyes would remind him of the weight of what he was doing. Madison walked around my home like she already owned it, pointing to things and giving orders. To her, my belongings were not sacred. They were upgrades for her perfect suburban house. I had given my entire life to raise Daniel. I thought he would be the one person who would protect me in my old age. Yet here I was, watching him carry away the last fragments of a life built with sacrifice. And as the truck's doors slammed shut, I felt as if they were closing on me too. My heart whispered the question I could not say out loud. What would you do if the child you sacrificed everything for turned his back on you? That was the day my story of betrayal truly began. I was only 23 when I became a widow. My husband, Thomas, died in a factory accident on a stormy October night, leaving me with nothing but our 15-year-old son, Daniel, and a heart so heavy I could barely breathe. I remember returning from the hospital, drenched from the rain, clutching Daniel in my arms as I promised him through tears that I would never let him go without. That night, I swore my life would be dedicated to him. To keep that promise, I worked as a seamstress in the small room at the back of our house. It was dark, the light bulb above me always flickering, but the sewing machine became my constant companion. Every stitch was for Daniel. Every prick of the needle, every scar on my fingers was proof of my devotion. I stitched prom dresses for neighbor girls, hemmed uniforms for the local school, made curtains for the families down the street. I sold the diamond ring Thomas had given me on our wedding day. I sold the gold earrings my grandmother had passed down to me. I even sold the watch Thomas had gifted me on our first anniversary. All of it went to pay for Daniel's tuition, his books, his dream of becoming an engineer. I will never forget walking into the pawn shop with those treasures wrapped in a handkerchief. The man behind the counter counted out $1,200, far less than what they meant to me, but enough for Daniel's first semester. For 5 long years I worked 12-hour days. My shoulders stooped from leaning over fabric. My eyes grew tired from the endless focus under that dim lamp. There were nights when my hands bled from the needle pricks, and I could barely lift a spoon to eat my dinner. But every time Daniel called me, excited about a new class or a project he was working on, it felt worth it. "Mom, I'm learning so much," he would say, and my heart swelled with pride even as my body weakened. The day Daniel graduated, I wore the only elegant dress I had left, a simple wine-colored gown I had kept after selling nearly everything else. I clapped until my hands stung when his name was called, my chest bursting with pride as he walked across the stage in his black cap and gown. When he hugged me and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. I never would have made it without you," I thought every sacrifice had finally paid off. That photograph of us from that day still sits on my nightstand. For years, I believed it was the symbol of our bond, a reminder that our story had a happy ending. I dreamed that with Daniel's new career, we would finally live a little, maybe fix up the old house, maybe even travel to the places he used to point at in the atlas when he was a boy. But I did not know then that life has cruel ways of teaching us lessons. I did not know that the very sacrifices I thought would bind us together could one day become the very reasons he would turn away from me. Daniel came home one Sunday afternoon with a nervous smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he set his keys on the old kitchen table. For a brief moment, my heart leapt. I imagined a kind young woman who would share in our small family, someone who might call me Mom too, and who would bring laughter and maybe grandchildren into this quiet house. But when the front door opened, I knew immediately I had been wrong. Madison was tall, elegant, with flawless blonde hair swept into a glossy ponytail and long, red nails that looked like sharp talons. She wore a coral dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe and heels that echoed across my cement floor like a judge's gavel. From the second she entered, her eyes darted around my modest home with thinly veiled disdain. "Mom, this is Madison, my girlfriend," Daniel said quickly, his voice almost apologetic. I wiped my hands on my apron and extended them in welcome, but Madison barely brushed my fingers before pulling away to dig out a tissue from her designer purse, wiping her hands as if my touch had dirtied her. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," she murmured without meeting my eyes. "Please, sit. I'll make coffee," I said, forcing cheer into my voice even though my chest felt heavy. As the old pot boiled on the stove, I heard Madison whisper in the living room, "Daniel, did you really grow up here?" Her tone dripped with disbelief. "Yes, but it's temporary, love. We're saving for our own house," Daniel answered, his voice filled with shame that pierced my heart. When I returned with coffee served in my best porcelain cups, Madison pushed hers aside. "I don't drink coffee. Do you have organic tea? Maybe sparkling mineral water?" I felt my throat tighten. "I only have tap water," I admitted. She smiled politely, but her eyes remained cold. The rest of the visit was no better. She asked questions that weren't really questions but insults wrapped in curiosity. "How long has it been since you painted these walls? Is that couch antique? You don't have central air?" Daniel sat quietly, his face tense, not once defending me. Finally, she turned her gaze to my hands, calloused and rough from decades of sewing. "So Daniel tells me you're a seamstress," she said in a voice as sweet as poison. "That must be hard these days. But at least Daniel doesn't need you to support him anymore, right?" Her words cut like glass. I had dreamed of Daniel's independence for years, but never had I imagined it would mean I was disposable. "Mom will always be important to me," Daniel said, but his voice was weak, unconvincing. Madison slid her arm through his and gave a smile that felt like a victory. "Of course she is, love. But it's time you build your own family now." And in that moment, I realized I was already being replaced. After that day, Daniel's visits grew less frequent. At first, he would stop by every weekend, then once a month, and eventually only when Madison allowed it. Each time, his hugs felt shorter, his smile less genuine. The son who once told me everything about his life now answered my questions with one-word replies. When I called him, it was often Madison who picked up. "Daniel is very busy right now, Mrs. Carter." "I'll tell him you called," she would say, her voice polite but laced with finality. Sometimes she didn't even bother with excuses. The phone would ring, then click into silence. I told myself he was busy, that young men with good jobs and big dreams had little time for their mothers. But deep down, I knew it wasn't work that kept him away. It was Madison. One Tuesday morning, she arrived at my doorstep alone. Her heels struck the floor like a warning bell. She sat on the edge of my sofa, careful not to touch the worn cushions, and folded her arms with the confidence of someone who knew she was about to win. "Evelyn," she began, using my name instead of mom or mother-in-law, her voice sugar-coated but sharp. "Daniel and I found a beautiful house in a wonderful neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a garden, plenty of space for the family we plan to build." I smiled with genuine joy. "That's wonderful. When's the wedding? How can I help?" Her expression didn't change. "That's why I came. You see, the house is very expensive. And Daniel spends a lot on you visits, groceries, medicine. A mother who truly loves her son would want to see him prosper. Don't you agree?" Her words struck me like ice water. "Of course I want Daniel to be happy," I said quickly. "I've always wanted that." "Then you'll understand," she continued, crossing her legs and adjusting her pearl necklace, "that it's time for you to stop being a burden." "A burden?" The word cracked in my throat. "I've never been a burden. I've worked my whole life." She interrupted with a laugh, soft and cruel. "This isn't about the past. Daniel is no longer a boy who needs his mother. He's a man who has responsibilities. If you truly love him, let him go. Stop calling so much. Stop reminding him of what you sacrificed. Stop depending on him." I whispered, almost to myself, "I never asked him for anything." "But he feels obligated," she replied smoothly. "He told me you make him feel guilty with your stories, your tears, your loneliness. That's emotional manipulation, Evelyn. And Daniel is tired." My hands trembled as I gripped the armrest of my sofa. For the first time, I wondered if she was right. Had I been suffocating him without knowing? Had my memories, the ones I treasured as proof of our love, become chains that weighed him down? Madison stood, brushing invisible dust from her designer jeans. "If you love him, let him live. You've already had your life. It's time to give him his." When the door closed behind her, silence fell heavy over the house. I sat frozen for hours, staring at the faded photographs on the wall, questioning everything I had ever done. In the weeks that followed, I forced myself to step back. When Daniel called, I kept the conversations short. When he offered to visit, I found excuses. When he insisted on helping with bills, I refused. Each refusal felt like tearing away a piece of my own heart. At night, the house became unbearable. Without the familiar hum of the refrigerator or the laughter of my son, the silence grew louder. I ate bread with tea because buying fresh food daily was all I could manage without proper storage. The television, once our companion on long evenings, was gone. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Wilson from next door came by with a casserole. "You've lost so much weight, Evelyn. Are you all right?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile, but inside I was hollow. And it was in that hollow silence, with hunger gnawing at my stomach and loneliness tearing at my soul, that I realized I had reached the bottom. The very life I had built for Daniel had left me with nothing: no husband, no son, no home filled with laughter. Just me, alone, in an empty house that felt more like a tomb than a refuge. One morning, as I sat hunched over my sewing machine, the mailman slid a thick cream-colored envelope under my door. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another bill I could barely afford. But when I saw the elegant handwriting spelling out my name, my heart skipped. Inside was a formal letter from a law office downtown. At first, I panicked, imagining debts or lawsuits. But then I saw a second sheet tucked inside, written in a hand I recognized instantly, even though 50 years had passed. The signature at the bottom made my breath catch: Richard Thompson. Richard, my first love. I was 17 the last time I saw him. He was headed off to study medicine in Chicago while I stayed home to care for my ailing mother. We promised to write, but life swept us in different directions. I married Thomas, built a life, raised Daniel. Richard became a doctor, successful, respected. I had not thought of him in years, not because I had forgotten, but because I believed that chapter of my life was long closed. Yet here was his voice on the page. "My dearest Evelyn," the letter began, "I have searched for you for years. After my wife passed away, I made a promise to her that I would seek out the woman who first captured my heart. Not a single day has passed without me wondering what became of you. I am 75 now, and though I have built a life of work and travel, I am profoundly lonely. I want to know if there is still a chance for us to meet again, to reclaim what we lost so long ago." Tears blurred the words. For months I had felt invisible, unwanted, discarded, and now someone was telling me I had been remembered, cherished even, across half a century. Richard wrote that he had sold his clinic and invested wisely. He had more money than he could ever spend, but none of it meant anything without someone to share it with. "If you are still alive, if you are still free, please meet me. Let us not waste another day," he wrote. Attached was a recent photograph of him. His hair was white, his face lined with age, but his eyes were exactly as I remembered: kind, steady, filled with warmth. The law office included instructions for dinner at the Palace Hotel, the most elegant place in the city. Enclosed was also a check for $500, with a note: "Buy yourself something beautiful. You deserve to feel like a queen." For a long time I sat with the letter pressed against my chest, crying as quietly as I could. After so many years of sacrifice and loneliness, here was a chance I never expected, a chance to be seen, valued, loved again. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, clutching the photograph of Richard. For the first time in years, I felt something stir in me that had been buried: hope. The next evening, I stood before the mirror in a coral-colored dress I had bought with Richard's check. My hair was freshly styled, the gray softened with a touch of color, my posture straighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long while, I looked at myself and saw not just an old, worn-out seamstress, but a woman who still had worth. A black car arrived at my house precisely at 7. The driver opened the door with formality, and for a moment I felt like Cinderella heading to the ball. My neighbors peeked through their curtains, no doubt wondering why a fancy car had come for a widow, who usually walked to the market with a cart. When I stepped into the Palace Hotel, the grandeur overwhelmed me: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, carpets so thick my shoes made no sound. My heart pounded as I was led to a table by the window, and there he was. Richard stood waiting, dressed in a gray suit, his white hair perfectly combed, his eyes lit up with joy. The moment he saw me, his face broke into a smile so warm it made me feel 17 again. "Evelyn," he whispered, pulling me into his arms. "My beautiful Evelyn." His embrace was firm yet tender, filled with decades of longing. When he finally let go, he held my hands and studied me with awe. "You are even more beautiful than I remembered." I laughed softly, embarrassed. Richard, I'm 73. I hardly feel beautiful anymore. But he shook his head. Age has nothing to do with it. Beauty is in the soul, and yours shines brighter than ever. Over dinner we talked for hours. He told me about his travels, his late wife, his successes and regrets. I told him about Daniel, about my years of sacrifice, though I spared him the darkest details. We laughed, we remembered, we rediscovered. As the evening drew to a close, Richard reached across the table, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Evelyn, I don't want to waste another day. Come live with me, not as a guest but as my partner, as the woman you were always meant to be in my life. Tears welled in my eyes. After so many years of loneliness, someone was asking me not for my labor, not for my sacrifices, but for my companionship and love. Yes, I whispered, my voice trembling but certain. Yes, Richard, I will. In that moment, I felt the weight of decades lift. For the first time in my life, I was not giving everything away. I was finally receiving love in return. 3 weeks after I moved into Richard's home, I sat on the patio sipping coffee, enjoying the kind of peace I never thought I would know again. The garden was filled with flowers he planted just for me. I felt alive, renewed. That was when the phone rang. Mom, Daniel's voice came through, but it was not the confident voice I remembered. It was shaky, panicked. Mom, where are you? I went to your house, it's empty. The neighbors said you moved. Please, I need to see you. For a moment my old instinct surged. I wanted to run to him, to comfort him, the way I always had. But then I remembered all those nights I cried alone, all the times Madison told me I was a burden. I steadied my voice. I'm fine, Daniel. I'm living with someone very special. There was silence on the line. With who? He asked, confused. With Richard Thompson, I said. A man who loves me for who I am. Daniel's breathing grew ragged, and then the sobs came. Mom, please, I need you. Madison, she left me. She ran off with another man, my boss. She took all our savings. And then the company folded. I lost everything. I don't even have a place to stay. His words hit me like a wave of cruel irony. Madison, who had worked so hard to push me out of his life, had destroyed his instead. She had taken not only his money, but also the very possessions he had taken from me. I'm sorry, Daniel, I said quietly. I truly am. But I can't be your safety net anymore. For 73 years, I lived only for others. Now, for the first time, I am living for myself. Mom, please, he begged, his voice breaking. I was wrong. Madison poisoned me against you. I thought you were holding me back. I see now how blind I was. Please, give me another chance. Richard, who had been listening nearby, gently placed his hand on my shoulder. His steady presence gave me strength. Daniel, I said firmly but without anger, you are always my son. I forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean I can rescue you again. You must learn to stand on your own feet. Richard then spoke, his tone calm yet resolute. Daniel, I can help you find work. I can help you get on your feet. But you must respect your mother's new life. She deserves happiness after everything she's endured. Daniel was silent for a long time. At last, his voice returned, small and broken. You're right. I understand. I don't want to lose her forever. In that moment, I realized the balance had shifted. No longer was I the desperate mother begging for scraps of attention. Now it was Daniel, humbled, recognizing the love he had once taken for granted. The son who had walked out of my home with a moving truck now sat with nothing, while I, the mother he thought disposable, had finally found abundance. Life, I realized, has its own way of delivering justice. 6 months later, Richard and I were married in a quiet ceremony in the garden of our home. The sun lit up the flowers he had planted for me, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly celebrated. Daniel stood among the small group of guests. He was sober, humbled, working at a steady job Richard had helped him find. He looked at me with eyes full of regret but also gratitude. Mom, he whispered as he hugged me after the ceremony. I never thought I'd see you this happy. Thank you for forgiving me. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserved. Richard squeezed my hand, and I knew that whatever years we had left would be filled with dignity, companionship, and love. Together we started a small foundation to support elderly women who, like me, had been abandoned or forgotten. Each time I meet one of them, I see the same disbelief in their eyes, the disbelief that life could offer them another chance. If my story teaches anything, it is this: sometimes we must lose everything to discover what we truly deserve. Do not let anyone convince you that you are disposable. Love, respect, and joy are not reserved for the young. They are reserved for the worthy, and you are worthy. So tell me, if you had lived my story, would you have forgiven? Or would you have walked away? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, Life is too short to settle for anything less than the love you deserve.